The chair leg scraped against tile, a sharp sound that cut through the dinner rush like a blade through silk. A porcelain teacup rattled against its saucer, the delicate chime barely audible above the kitchen clatter. Yet somehow, it seemed to announce that the evening's careful rhythm was about to shatter. In the space between that scrape and what followed, the head waiter felt his 23 years of restaurant experience crystallize into a single moment of recognition. Trouble had just announced itself with the politeness of fine china. Subscribe to Jackie Chan, the Untold Legacy, for stories that reveal how true strength shows itself when no one expects it. From where the head waiter stood, serving tray balanced in one practiced hand, the restaurant's flow had been absolutely perfect until that moment. The Golden Dragon had earned its reputation through decades of careful choreography. Servers gliding between round tables with their spinning lazy Susans, steam rising from the kitchen in steady clouds that carried the complex aromatics of Cantonese cuisine, and the soft percussion of chopsticks against porcelain, creating the kind of background symphony that meant families felt safe and business thrived. The dining room held exactly 47 tables, each positioned with mathematical precision to allow servers clear lanes of movement while giving diners the illusion of intimate conversation. Tea service flowed like clockwork, refills arriving before cups emptied, dishes cleared before diners realized they were finished. Then Table 7 erupted into something that threatened to turn professional hospitality into amateur theater. But what made this evening memorable wasn't the disruption itself. Restaurants survived countless moments of human drama. What made it unforgettable was watching someone transform a potential disaster into a masterclass in control, using nothing more than space, timing, and an understanding of human nature that most people never develop. The man who stood too quickly was large in the way that suggested he was used to people moving aside when he approached. His shoulders carried the particular set of someone who had never learned to make himself smaller in crowded spaces, and his voice, when it finally came, carried the peculiar confidence that emerges from a lifetime of never being told no. He wore an expensive jacket that fit poorly, the kind of garment chosen for status rather than comfort. And his movements had the slight imprecision that suggested the evening's liquid confidence had been building steadily since dinner began. Jackie Chan sat 3 tables away, occupying his chair with the kind of quiet presence that somehow made him appear both smaller and larger than his movie image suggested. The head waiter had served countless celebrities over the years, and most carried their fame like heavy luggage, constantly aware of its weight, constantly managing how others perceived it. Jackie seemed different. He worked through his bowl of dan dan noodles with methodical precision, each movement economical and purposeful, as if eating itself were a practice that deserved complete attention. What struck the head waiter most was how Jackie's presence seemed to settle rather than disturb the restaurant's atmosphere. Nearby diners recognized him, certainly. There were the subtle glances, the whispered confirmations between companions, but somehow his manner of sitting, of eating, of existing in the space, made celebrity feel manageable rather than disruptive. It was as if he understood that his job, even when off-duty, was to help normal life continue normally. This understanding would soon be tested in ways that no one at Table 7 could have anticipated. What happened next would depend entirely on how Jackie chose to answer a challenge that had nothing to do with noodles and everything to do with the kind of masculine theater that periodically erupted in public spaces when ego encountered opportunity. The large man's companion, a smaller figure who seemed to understand social dynamics better than his friend, whispered something urgent that carried the tone of someone trying to prevent a predictable disaster. But their friend was already committed to his trajectory, his body language shifting from casual dinner conversation to something that resembled a predator marking territory. People later said you could see the moment when restraint left his eyes, replaced by the kind of certainty that makes strangers into unwilling witnesses and peaceful restaurants into stages for performances nobody requested. The head waiter's grip instinctively tightened on his serving tray, as 23 years of professional experience sent urgent signals through his nervous system. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the emotional temperature of his dining room, and everything about the current moment suggested that broken plates, scattered families, and emergency phone calls were about to replace the evening's careful choreography. His free hand moved unconsciously toward the order pad in his vest pocket, already calculating how to document whatever was about to unfold, while simultaneously planning exit routes for the elderly couple at table 12 and the young family with children near the window. The restaurant's sound palette began to shift in subtle ways that only experienced service staff would notice. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they modulated downward, creating space for whatever drama was announcing itself. Chopsticks paused mid-motion. Teacups found saucers more gently. Even the lazy Susans seemed to slow their rotations, as if the entire room's machinery was responding to the change in atmospheric pressure that preceded social storms. "You're Jackie Chan," the man announced, his words dropping into the dining room like stones into still water, each syllable designed to command attention rather than request acknowledgement. It wasn't a question, and the way he delivered it suggested that being Jackie Chan came with certain obligations, specifically the obligation to provide entertainment for anyone bold enough to demand it. The lazy Susan at Jackie's table slowed to a stop, as if even the restaurant's mechanical elements sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the room's social contract. Jackie's response emerged so quietly that servers leaning against the kitchen door frame had to strain their ears to catch it. From where witnesses positioned themselves, it appeared that he simply acknowledged the statement with a movement so slight it might have been mistaken for a natural adjustment of posture. The head waiter, trained to read body language as fluently as he read order tickets, noticed that Jackie's acknowledgement carried no invitation for further conversation, no opening for the kind of exchange that the challenger seemed to be seeking. It was the social equivalent of a politely closed door, perfectly courteous and absolutely final. This was decidedly not the reaction the challenger had orchestrated in his mind. Restaurant confrontations followed predictable patterns, and the head waiter had witnessed most variations over his career. Pride demanded performance, and when performance was denied, pride typically escalated its demands until it received satisfaction or created destruction. The stranger at table 7 seemed to be following this script exactly, his body language shifting from announcement to expectation to the beginning stages of indignation as Jackie refused to provide the response that would validate his approach. The head waiter began moving between tables with deliberate casualness, his serving tray becoming a mobile boundary that could redirect foot traffic, block clear sight lines, or serve as an improvised barrier if the situation deteriorated beyond words. His movement patterns had been perfected through decades of managing difficult customers, drunk diners, and the occasional celebrity encounter that threatened to disturb other patrons' peaceful evenings. The receipt pad in his vest pocket pressed against his chest with each step, a small reminder that everything happening tonight would eventually need to be documented, reported, and potentially explained to authorities if events continued their current trajectory. Other diners began exhibiting the subtle behavioral shifts that indicated they were transitioning from oblivious dinner guests to potential witnesses or casualties. Heads turned with studied casualness, conversations modulated to allow for better eavesdropping, and several families with young children started the kind of preliminary gathering of belongings that suggested they were preparing for rapid departures if circumstances required them. "I heard you're supposed to be tough," the man continued, his voice gaining volume and losing social refinement with each word, as if alcohol and ego were working together to strip away the thin veneer of public civility. The statement hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that everyone in the dining room understood, even if they pretended to focus on their meals. Other diners began executing that subtle choreography of social embarrassment, adjusting their positions to create better escape routes, gathering purses and jackets with increased efficiency, and engaging in the kind of intensely focused conversations that served as polite shields against witnessing whatever unpleasantness was building at the center of the room. A family with young children near the window started gathering their belongings with the practiced speed that suggested they had navigated social emergencies before. The elderly couple at table 12 continued their quiet conversation, but shifted their chairs to create a clearer path to the exit. Even the kitchen staff seemed to sense the changing atmosphere. The head waiter noticed that the steady rhythm of plates and utensils from behind the swinging doors had become more muted, as if the cooks were straining to monitor the situation while maintaining their professional duties. Jackie's teacup met his lips in a motion so precisely controlled that it seemed choreographed, each movement demonstrating the kind of physical awareness that most people associated with martial arts performances but rarely witnessed in everyday contexts. The steam rising from the liquid created a momentary screen between him and his challenger, and when it cleared, Jackie's expression hadn't shifted by so much as a muscle. From where the head waiter observed, positioning himself near the kitchen door for optimal sightline management, it appeared that Jackie was treating the confrontation like weather, something to be acknowledged and adapted to, rather than something that required active engagement or resistance. The ceramic teapot on Jackie's table caught the overhead light at precisely the right angle to create small reflections across its glazed surface, each fragment containing distorted images of faces turned toward the unfolding drama. The head waiter found himself momentarily mesmerized by the way light moved across the vessel's curve, transforming the simple act of tea service into something that looked almost ceremonial, as if Jackie were performing some ancient ritual designed to maintain peace in spaces where peace was threatened. But the challenger was just beginning to understand that his carefully constructed stage wasn't being shared. "Are you deaf or just scared?" The words carried enough force to make servers pause in their duties. The head waiter watched as Jackie's shoulders remained level, his breathing unchanged. It was the kind of stillness that professional fighters recognized, though most people mistook it for passivity. The ceramic teapot on Jackie's table caught the overhead light, its surface reflecting fragments of faces around the room, all turned toward a drama that one man was performing and another was refusing to join. The moment stretched longer than it should have, filled with the kind of silence that makes every small sound amplified. Somewhere in the kitchen, a wok sizzled. A cash register chimed at the front counter. Jackie's challenger seemed to realize that his audience was waiting for something more than words. That's when he made the mistake of reaching for Jackie's table. What followed happened so smoothly that several witnesses would later disagree about the sequence of events. The head waiter, positioned with a perfect sightline between the kitchen door and the cashier counter, would remember it as a lesson in geometry rather than combat. Jackie's response wasn't dramatic, it was architectural. As the challenger's hand moved toward Jackie's shoulder, Jackie simply adjusted his position by inches. The movement looked casual, almost accidental, like someone shifting to get more comfortable in their chair. But those few inches changed everything about the space between them. Suddenly, the challenger was reaching for air, his momentum carrying him slightly off balance, his intended grip landing on nothing but restaurant atmosphere. The serving tray in the head waiter's hands trembled slightly as he watched Jackie demonstrate something that most people only read about in philosophy books. Control wasn't about stopping force. It was about directing it into emptiness. Jackie's next movement was even more subtle. He rose from his chair with the fluid grace of someone who understood that every motion could be purposeful or wasted, but never both. Instead of stepping away from his challenger, he stepped around the man's extended arm, using the chair back as a guide that somehow positioned the challenger between Jackie and the wall, while making it look like Jackie was simply making room for better conversation. The head waiter had expected escalation. Broken furniture, the kind of scene that sent families fleeing and left servers sweeping up debris until closing time. Instead, he found himself watching a demonstration of how space could be used to solve problems that fists usually made worse. The challenger, now facing a wall instead of his target, seemed confused by his own position. From where other diners sat, it appeared that Jackie had somehow managed to put physical distance between them without anyone actually moving very far. The lazy Susan at Jackie's table had completed another slow rotation, as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a brief pause in its eternal cycle. "This isn't over," the challenger said, though his voice had lost the commanding tone from earlier. He seemed to be addressing the wall more than Jackie, his confidence diluted by the simple fact that his intended victim was no longer where ego demanded him to be. Jackie's response was to reach for the teapot and refill his cup with the kind of measured precision that suggested the evening's primary concerns remained culinary rather than combative. The soft pour of liquid over porcelain provided a gentle soundtrack to de-escalation, each drop carrying the message that some challenges weren't worth acknowledging with anything more than proper tea service. The head waiter watched as other diners gradually returned to their conversations, the collective tension dissolving like sugar in warm water. The challenger stood by the wall for another moment, seeming to realize that his audience had lost interest in a performance that refused to become a spectacle. When he finally returned to his table, his movements carried the deflated quality of someone who had learned that not every provocation deserves a response. What struck the head waiter most was how Jackie had managed the entire situation without humiliating anyone. The challenger hadn't been defeated so much as redirected, his energy absorbed and transformed into something harmless rather than something destructive. It was the difference between breaking a wave and letting it wash over rocks until it returned to calm water. As the evening progressed, the restaurant's rhythm gradually restored itself. Servers resumed their careful choreography between tables, steam continued rising from the kitchen, and the soft percussion of dinnerware returned to its comforting background symphony. Jackie finished his meal with the same quiet attention he'd shown throughout the incident, as if interruptions were simply another course to be navigated with patience and proper technique. The head waiter pulled out his order pad and wrote a brief note about the evening's events, though he suspected that most of what had happened couldn't be captured in words. How do you record the moment when violence transforms into space? How do you document the sound of a challenge dissolving into silence? When Jackie prepared to leave, he approached the counter to settle his bill with the same measured grace that had characterized his entire visit. The head waiter handed him the receipt, noting that Jackie's hands showed no trembling, no adrenaline aftershock, no sign that the evening had been anything other than another quiet dinner in a city full of restaurants. "Thank you for the excellent service," Jackie said, his voice carrying the kind of genuine warmth that suggested he understood how much work went into maintaining the peaceful atmosphere he'd helped preserve. The head waiter accepted the compliment with a slight bow, recognizing the exchange between professionals who understood that their job was to protect spaces where families could gather safely. As Jackie walked toward the exit, the head waiter noticed that his path took him past the challenger's table. For a moment, both men were in close proximity again, close enough for another confrontation if either chose to pursue it. Instead, Jackie offered a small nod of acknowledgement, the kind of gesture that recognized another human being without carrying judgment about their behavior. The challenger returned the nod with obvious relief, his expression suggesting that he'd learned something about the difference between strength that demands attention and strength that requires none. After Jackie left, the restaurant continued its evening service without further incident. families finished their meals, friends shared stories over tea, and the kitchen maintained its steady rhythm of preparation and delivery. The head waiter moved between tables with his usual efficiency, but found himself thinking about what he'd witnessed. In his years of restaurant service, he'd seen countless displays of ego and temperament. He'd watched anger explode into violence, seen pride destroy pleasant evenings, witnessed how quickly social situations could deteriorate when people chose confrontation over conversation. What made this evening memorable wasn't the absence of conflict, but the way conflict had been transformed into something else entirely. Jackie hadn't won a fight because there hadn't been a fight to win. Instead, he demonstrated something far more valuable: how to navigate challenge without creating casualties, how to maintain dignity without demanding defeat from others, how to protect a room full of strangers by refusing to feed the hunger for spectacle that could turn dinner into disaster. The lesson lingered long after the evening ended, captured not in the head waiter's brief notes, but in the memory of how silence could be stronger than shouting, how space could be more powerful than contact, how true strength showed itself not in what it could destroy, but in what it chose to preserve. As the restaurant prepared for closing, staff members who had witnessed the incident found themselves discussing what they'd seen. Their conversations kept returning to the same observation. Jackie Chan hadn't looked like a movie star that evening. He'd looked like someone who understood that real life was more important than performance, that protecting strangers was worth more than proving points. But questions remained. If Jackie could control a crowded restaurant without shock or violence, what happened when provocation followed him to places with no staff to witness, no tables to navigate, no exits to manage? How did someone maintain that level of control when there was nowhere to redirect energy except into direct confrontation? The head waiter locked the restaurant door behind the last customer, the receipt pad still tucked in his vest pocket, containing a record of ordinary transactions and one extraordinary lesson about the space between strength and gentleness, between responding and reacting, between what the world demands and what wisdom chooses to give.